Welcome to Empowered Living. I'm Sheu. On this podcast, innovative leaders and visionary experts share insights and practical tools for work, family, and marriage. Each episode, we'll explore how to elevate your life while staying grounded in what truly matters to you. You're working hard to navigate relationships, build a thriving family, and create a legacy of purpose. We're here to help you do that with confidence and intentionality. So if you're ready to live a life by design, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Empowered Living, the podcast where we dive deep into conversations that shape our relationships, our growth, and the way we show up in the world. I'm your host, Sheu, and today we're tackling a topic that so many of us wrestle with: boundaries. If you've ever struggled with setting limits, saying no without guilt, or protecting your energy in relationships, this episode is for you. My guest today is Vanessa McNeal, an award-winning filmmaker, speaker, and coach who specializes in personal transformation. She brings a powerful perspective on why boundaries matter, not just as a practical tool, but as a way to honor our personal energy and well-being. We'll explore why boundaries can feel so difficult to set, the fears that hold us back, and how we can shift our mindset to see them as an essential part of self-care. Vanessa also breaks down the 3 nervous system states that shape how we navigate stress, relationships, and emotional overwhelm, offering us practical ways to regulate our energy and reclaim our voice. This conversation is full of wisdom, actionable strategies, and deep insights that will challenge the way you think about boundaries and personal empowerment. Let's dive in. Hey, Vanessa, so excited to chat with you today.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
All right, let's just dive right in. So I want to talk today about boundaries. I want to know how to actually do them in a way that's effective, because this is something that I struggle with. A lot of my friends struggle with this. How do we actually set boundaries that work?
Yeah, so I like to think of boundaries as them being our personal energy currency, and it's something that we have to protect. So when people struggle with boundaries, they're typically struggling with protecting their greatest asset, which is our energy. And so it's all about being able to check in with yourself and notice, how much energy do I have? How much energy am I willing to give away? And also this caveat of, just because I have the energy doesn't mean that I have to give it away either. And so I think it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of personal awareness and bravery to say no, but also realizing that it's bigger than saying no as well.
Why do you think so many people struggle with boundaries?
I think that there's a lot of fear that shows up when people think through what will happen in their relationships if they say no, or if they cut off their energy in a certain way. I think there's fear that the relationship will end. I also believe I know growing up, I was taught to be a good girl, a nice girl, and, shut your mouth and do what other people say, even if it's not in the highest and best service of my good. And so I think there's also this, for me, this cultural nuance of being a girl and eventually a woman, of just like, you do what people ask you to, even if it doesn't make sense for me. And if we don't do that, then we're not good. And or we're difficult to work with, or we're difficult people, and we're not willing to just give and give and give. So I think, again, there's a lot of fear that shows up around, how will our relationship change? Will people not see me as reliable? Will they not think that I'm serious about my business or my career, this relationship, this friendship, whatever that is? And so I think that it's very much based in fear or guilt around what may happen or change in the relationship dynamic.
Yeah, so if that's the case, how do you work through that? How do you get to a place where you are okay with the potential of letting someone down or not being seen a certain way?
We have to build our tolerance for being okay with other people's discomfort. And oftentimes we can grow that muscle by being okay with our own. Because if I'm okay with my own discomfort, if I can sit in my pain or my own disappointment a little bit more, then I'm probably able to do that a little bit more with people, because everyone is just a mirror to us. How we are with ourselves is a direct reflection typically of how we are with other people. So if I can be okay and give myself grace and say, I can't do it all, and I'm okay with that, and I can stand on what I want to stand on, then the relationship will be reflected with that truth as well.
If I get to a place where I say, okay, I want to start protecting my energy, start setting some boundaries, and I am aware that it's going to be uncomfortable, what is the next step? How do I actually do it?
It's just communicating that. And I think what we have to do when we do that is to not have 1,000,001 excuses or feeling like we need to give reasons for why we're changing the dynamic or the dance of the relationship or how we show up and operate in our businesses. It's more about just saying, hey, I know that we're used to meeting on Thursday night. How does next Tuesday work instead? Or if you have a commitment and you checking in with yourself and you know that you don't have the energy for it and you know that you won't be in the highest good by being there at that time, you don't need to say why. It doesn't need to be this long story. It's like drop the story around it, give them the facts. This time doesn't work for me, but I would still really love to meet you at the next available date. I hope that you understand. I think that we've just been so taught to do that. And again, it goes back to being a good girl. It's like all of this coaxing that we have to do. So it's dropping the story, being direct and clear with ourselves, and then communicating that with other people and trusting that the relationship will survive if it's a healthy one. And if it's not, it's a signal and a clue that if other people can't respect your boundary, they probably didn't respect you. And again, it's going back to that thread of, can we be okay with that discomfort? Can we live a little bit in realizing that some relationships are only working because you're working yourself out and you're stressing yourself out and you're bending over backwards?
So, if I am someone who is not used to setting the boundaries, where do you suggest that I start? Like, how do I even know what to say? And then, how do I create the space for me to kind of get in a practice round before I actually have to deliver what I am perceiving as really tough news to tell someone?
That's a really good question. I think practicing with friends or families. I mean, we live in an age of AI, so we've been practicing with Chat GPT around, hey, here's a situation, run a scenario with me. I don't know that everyone would be comfortable with that, but you could really truly start there in terms of just practicing it out. My coach growing up used to tell me that practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So the more that someone gets in the habit of being able to speak clearly and directly about their energy and what's working, what's not, the easier it will get.
What happens if I set a boundary and the person I'm trying to communicate this boundary to is not accepting it? They
Yeah.
are maybe not used to me setting a boundary. How do I deal with that?
Yeah, one of the biggest nuances that I learned about boundaries is that when a boundary is broken, that person doesn't need to do anything about it. That like the burden of action is not on that person that's not respecting the boundary, it's on you. So when someone isn't respecting your boundary, you don't wait for them to change. You don't wait for them. It's not for them. The boundary is for you. So an example that I would give would be if a client of mine repeatedly misses a session in my coaching practice, I don't wait for them to figure it out or wait for them to change behavior. I would take them off of my schedule and send an email and say, here's a reminder of my no-show policy. Because you haven't respected it, sadly, we can't continue working together. So it takes, again, that bravery and that clarity within self to be able to do that. But we often misuse boundaries in a way by thinking that the burden of action is on that person, and it's not. If my son, he's a toddler, if he kept repeatedly throwing a remote at me, I wouldn't say, stop doing that. You're not listening to me. I would take the remote away from them. And that's what we need to do with people in our lives. If they're not respecting our boundaries, then we need to remove their access to us in our life.
So going back to this idea of like fear-based thinking with regards to setting boundaries, like we're afraid to set the boundaries because we're afraid something is going to happen. What about these scenarios where we really do feel like we need this person? Like, I don't want to burn this bridge because I need this person to watch my kids tonight, or whatever boundary I'm trying to set. I might be afraid to set that boundary because, I don't want to burn a bridge with my employee because I don't have capacity to look for a replacement. What do I do in these situations where I actually do need the person and there is potentially an issue with burning a bridge if I set that boundary?
That's such a good question. And I think, again, it goes back to re examining ourselves and our own patterns. I would ask the question, what happened in your life where you learned that you had to hijack your own intuition or your own comfort in a relationship to satisfy a need? Because we can talk about tools to navigate the conversation. We can talk about like these tactical things to do. But at the end of the day, that story will continue unless someone does the inner work to figure out why there's tolerance for a relationship like that in the very first place. And I know that's a difficult conversation to have, but that's what I would think about of that is a trauma story that's likely rooted in something that's happened in upbringing or childhood or something along the line where someone had to learn that they had to totally ignore and bypass their own feelings of safety and comfort in a relationship out of fear that they might go because they have a need in that person.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, what else can we do other than setting boundaries? What are other ways that we can manage our energy, manage our emotional resources other than just setting boundaries?
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that I do is around understanding our nervous systems. I don't think that we have the slightest idea how they work. It's a very intricate system, but it runs the way that we're thinking, the actions that we're taking. So I think it comes down to really understanding like what our baselines are. So there's I would say three primary nervous system states that we're all living and existing in. And that's what's responsible for how we're showing up. And if we feel safe enough to have the hard conversations or not to. So understanding the nervous systems is really important. It's the baseline for how we're seeing ourselves, our lives, and what feels good and what feels unsafe. And so I like to talk about those. There's, as I mentioned, three nervous system states. At the very bottom of the nervous system ladder, I like to think about it as a ladder, is called dorsal. And that's what happens when we shut down. For having a hard time practicing boundaries or showing up as our true authentic self, and there's very low energy, we're likely in a dorsal state. So dorsal is what happens when our nervous system has decided that the safe and most effective way to manage the energy is to shut down. So this is when it's hard to respond to emails. It's hard to show up for meetings, or oftentimes we're canceling on friends because we just don't even have the energy to even pretend that we're okay. That would be one of them. And then the next step up the rung of the nervous system ladder would be something called sympathetic. And in sympathetic, when we're in that state, there's a little bit more energy. So that's where anxiety lives. That's where anxiousness lives. And so this is where a lot of high achievers and entrepreneurs and business owners live, is I have to do everything and I have to do it right now. And I have to talk really fast because I'm running out of time and I can't trust anyone else to do it for me. I have to do it on my own. And it's living in autopilot. Sometimes it means that people in that state are waking up at 3 a.m. to check emails while they're going under their bathroom break. And so that's the second rung. And then where we all would like to live is ventral. And ventral is when we're open, we're most authentic. Ventral is where we can connect with ourselves and others most effectively. So I like to teach about that because it's really important to understand where we are on the ladder. And if you're on those lower two rungs, the way that you would be able to move out of those is by creating more safety within yourself in your environment. And you could do those by doing regulating tools, deep breathing, meditation, yoga, being in nature, having difficult conversations, practicing boundaries. And so outside of the boundary conversation, understanding your operating system is really important as well for wellness.
How do we use the knowledge of these three states to help us?
I think it helps us by you can use that knowledge to check in with yourself, because I would say that 9 out of 10 people have no idea where their homeostasis is on a day-to-day basis. There's typically a homeostasis, a home outside of a home that we're living in. And if you can know that you're in sympathetic, if you're moving too fast, whether that means you're there every day or something happened where you got there, it's important to know that so that you can realize that you need to slow down. If you're in dorsal and you're moving very slowly and you're becoming lethargic, it's important to use that information to know that you probably don't need to lay around anymore. You probably need to get up and start moving. And so that's how you would use that information.
What happens if I've been moving so fast for so long that it's like my new normal?
Yeah, that's what it ends up happening. And so if you're moving so fast for so long that it's a new normal, then it would be introducing regulating tools to break the cycle and pattern. And so what that would look like would be behavior interruption techniques. Like instead of first grabbing your phone when you wake up to check your emails, do something else instead. And I know that that is easier said than done, but that would change the trajectory of the morning. So being able to zoom your perspective out of yourself and seek to understand where in your life or where in your day you're creating more energy when there doesn't need to be energy there, and then backtracking to do different things would be a great first step.
I feel like for me, my body has gotten so used to moving so fast that it is my new normal, and it would feel almost like out of whack to not be this way. But do you think it's really possible to retrain my nervous system to calibrate it back to what it's supposed to be?
It's absolutely possible. It would take time and energy and work, of course, but it's so possible because our brains are so malleable. And you're absolutely right. To go outside of that state would create dysregulation at first, because your nervous system picked sympathetic because it feels safest there.
Yeah.
And it goes back to, well, why would my nervous system want me in overdrive all the time? As a coach, I think of the question, what is happening, or what is the story around why do I need to move so fast? Because there's always a reason for people's behavior. And a lot of people that are in sympathetic are like, I'm moving so fast, but I don't want to. How do I change? How do I do things differently? I don't like being here. But the nervous system actually likes what it knows. And it's quite comfortable there. That's why it wants to keep moving fast. And so it goes back to, again, seeking to understand the value and the purpose of being there. Because if there's a reason for your behavior and being sympathetic, it would mean that there's probably a lot of value. And when I say value, I mean there's probably a lot of rewards from being in sympathetic. You get more done. You probably don't have to rely on as many people. You can get things done on your own. You know what to expect because you're going to know the outcome. There's a lot of benefits to that behavior. So it's seeking to understand, when did I learn this? Why do I not trust going slower? Do I not believe that I'll have the same rewards if I'm more regulated and can function in a different way? The work that I do is helping people get to the root cause of why it is that they're there, instead of just focusing on like the how-tos of how to show up differently. It's about being able to disconnect the cord of the root of why it's there in the first place.
So, do you find that it's normal for people to go back and forth between the sympathetic and the dorsal? Or do you think that they usually have one that they'll lean towards more than the other?
Great question. So it goes back to me understanding it in terms of a ladder. So in order to get from dorsal, which is the bottom, to ventral, which is the top, you would have to go through sympathetic. So you can't jump states. So if you're in dorsal, you have to get to sympathetic first before you go to ventral. You cannot skip states. And so what that means is if you can think about a time where you experience depression or low energy, likely the next stage was a little bit of anxiety because you had a lot more energy to deal with. So that's what I like to think of in terms of the ladder. You could go from having a lot of energy to then dropping down to dorsal, or going to dorsal and then sympathetic. But if you want to go to ventral, you would have to move up the rungs of the ladder.
If somebody is in dorsal, how do they move up the rungs of the ladder? How do you conjure up this energy to actually do something? If you're in this state where you just feel so exhausted, burnt out, all you want to do is just, I mean, sometimes I'm like, I just want to lay on the couch and not move and not talk to anybody. It feels like I have to wave a magic wand to conjure up enough energy to actually move out of that state.
Yeah, exactly. I totally resonate with that because a lot of people have that experience. So when you're in dorsal, you want to create more energy because in dorsal, it's all about self-preservation, which is why you don't want to talk to anyone or get out of the bed or the couch. And so it would be introducing slow movements, getting out of bed, going for a walk. Like you have to like move the energy around so that there can be safety, more safety than what you had before. So this is probably not the best time to meditate. And I know that a lot of people would be like, wait, what? I had a friend who really struggled with depression and she was like, I'm going to start meditating. I'm like, no, sister, you do not need to meditate right now. Like that will bring your energy down in a way that you don't need that right now because it's already very low. So doing things that activate the body, activate the mind, like creates a sense of stimulus. When you're in sympathetic, meditation is probably one of the best tools because you have too much energy and you need to slow it down. But in dorsal, taking your time, when I say slow movements, I mean taking your time to get out of bed, to clean your desk, clean your house, connect. When you're in dorsal, you're completely disconnected from self and others. So maybe that just means calling a friend for 10 minutes and say, hey, I have 10 minutes, but I need to talk to someone right now. So it's just being able to introduce more energy and activity in that state.
But what I'm hearing is kind of chicken or the egg. Like you're telling me that to move out of dorsal, I need energy, but to get energy, I actually have to move my body. And so, how do we overcome that? Because in those moments, I feel so depleted that I don't feel like I have the physical ability to get up and go for a walk or even just to stand. And
Yeah.
so, how do we kind of jumpstart our body back into this state of energy?
Yeah, absolutely. Love that you brought that up. And I think that that would go back to checking in with self. And this doesn't need to be like a huge journal ritual or anything major, but it's asking yourself, which part of me doesn't want to move? Which part of me doesn't want to connect? Which part of me is protecting me from doing what I know would help me to feel better, like walking or talking to a friend. And it's being able to work with that part. So that's called parts work or internal family systems. And if standing up is too difficult or going on a walk or calling a friend is too difficult, work with that part. Which part of me doesn't want me to feel better? Which part of me doesn't want to rely on other people right now? And having a conversation with that part in your mind, in your head. You don't need to journal about it or do anything intricate, but understanding that part will help you understand what it needs. And if you could understand what it needs, then you could be able to be on the right track to do something differently about it. Because a great personal example of this is there are times, because we all have like these intricate, elaborate parts that live within ourselves. I have a part that when I'm sick, I don't want to feel better. And I know that that sounds wild to say that out loud, but the first thing that I do I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a business owner, I have a lot going on. And I'll have a conversation with myself and I'll say, which part of me doesn't want to feel better? And it's usually the part of me that longs for more rest because I don't get a lot of it. Or in seasons of there are certain seasons where I just don't get a lot of it at all.
Yeah.
And so then I work with that part and say, okay, how can I serve that need without continuing like this cold or this flu that's wiping me out and taking me away from everything? So it's about creating balance and creating a sense of regulation by saying, okay, I don't really want to be sick and continue these symptoms, but there's a part of me that's benefiting from it, and it's the part that needs rest. So working with that part to understand it, give it what it needs within reason.
Okay, so this example is giving me a lot of clarity on what you mean by when you say part. Can you give me one more example where you can show me what part of something is feeling something and then what the self-talk might sound like?
What I see often in my clients are clients coming to me and there's a part of them that feels confused. As I mentioned, I like to think of this as a bus. Everyone has a bus with many parts, but there's only one driver on a bus.
Yeah.
And I'll have clients come and the driver on the bus is confusion. And they're like, I don't know what to do with my career. I don't know what to do with my marriage. I don't know what to do with this or that. And yes, a part of them is confused, but not the entirety of their being. They choose confusion because it's a way for them to not take action around this other elaborate system that knows its full truth, what it wants to do or what it wants to say or act. And so that's what I mean when I say a part. So that part, there's a benefit of having that part. If I act confused, if I say I don't know what I want, if I say I don't know which step to take, then I just stay where I'm at. And there's this uncomfortable, even though it's uncomfortable, it feels safe feeling. And so working with that part to understand the value of it, I don't want to bad talk that part. That part is highly intelligent. It's protecting us from making a change because change is hard. But how can we move that part out of the driver's seat of the bus and put them in the back and move up one of these other more intelligent, higher aspects of us that does know what they want and that can act in a way that's more in alignment with where we want to go.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And what I love about the use of the word part is that it feels like it's just a part of me and it's not my whole being, right? Like
Yeah.
a part of me is confused, or a part of me is feeling sad, or a part of me is wanting more rest. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
my entire identity, which I think I often will use this language of I am confused as if it's the entire
Yeah.
being of me that is confused.
I think it's a way that we can honor the complexities of who we are because we're so complex, but we like to create stories around, well, I am confused. Well, that's not your identity. That's just a feeling that you're having. And so it's parts work is like one of the most helpful tools to understand who we are and why we're showing up in the ways that we do. Because the reality is we can't get rid of any of our parts. Like the 3-year-old me that learned how to show up in a certain way, she's still there. And sometimes she likes to overrun things. And I have to remind her, like, hey, sister, I'm here, this higher, more evolved part. I hear you, I see you, I love you, but I'm here now and we're going to do things differently. And it helps me to integrate. It's almost like a reparenting. We have to reparent some of our parts. We have to love on them differently so that they can trust these more evolved, intelligent parts that really know what they're doing most of the time.
I would love to talk to you about emotional overwhelm and what we
Mm-hmm.
can do in these moments where we feel flooded or just completely out of control. Like there's so much stuff going on. And, I think for a lot of us, it happens when not only do we feel the emotional overwhelm, but when the people around us are feeling the emotional overwhelm, and then we're carrying the weight of all of the emotions that are just floating around in this room. So
Mm-hmm.
would love to hear from you, like, what do we do in those situations where not only do we have to manage our own emotions, but everyone else around us?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is you actually don't have to manage anyone else's emotions. And if someone believes that, then that's probably creating more emotional overwhelm for themselves. So that would be a story that I would challenge around. Like, I'm actually not responsible for the way that other people feel. I'm only responsible for the way that I show up. And even when I share how I'm feeling, I'm not responsible for the way that other people react to it. Like, it's almost like an ego check of what type of power do I think that I have to make people feel one way or the other. I know a conversation that I have a lot with my son is like, you made me mad. And it's like, mommy can't make you mad. I understand that there are things that I can do that could elicit, it's like action reaction, but you're still a sovereign being and you still have the power to choose how you feel. I can't do that for you. And so, number one, you don't have to control or manage other people's feelings. But if you're feeling emotionally overwhelmed, it's going back to that parts work piece. Which part of me feels overwhelmed? Is it the people pleaser in me? Is it the doesn't trust other people part of me? Is it the part that's like super well meaning and just wants to do really well, but like needs reassurance? What does that part need? And how can you honor that part and give that part what it needs? And it's a visualization that you could do alongside of that is if you can get used to doing parts work, you can start to imagine certain parts in their ages that are associated with it. So if you are a people pleaser, if you can sort of do some time traveling to figure out where that started, it might be 6-year-old you. And so you could even visualize within yourself, like, what is 6-year-old people pleaser doing right now? Is she pacing around in a room? Is she hiding away in a closet? Is she like hurriedly like doing her homework? How can I, more evolved me, step into that visualization and offer that part something that they're not getting right now, which is the reason why this behavior pattern is persisting? And so those are all things that you could do like within the privacy of your own mind, and working on regulating the nervous system when there's emotional overwhelm for sure.
Is it usually pretty easy to tie one of those parts back to your younger self? Like, do people usually have a pretty easy time visualizing that younger child in that situation, that scenario?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if people do enough self reflection, they could. Because if you start to understand your patterns and where they're coming from, most people have a source. And that's what I work on a lot in coaching when people are like, I have no idea where this comes from. And it's like, well, let's just look through the files of your life and we can really figure it out together. Because at the end of the day, between the ages of 0, when I say 0, I mean within the womb of your mother, and 7 years old is where your foundation of the world is coming from. That's where your subconscious mind, it's like a tape recorder that's on between 0 and 7. It's intaking all of this information about who you are, how you relate to other people, where your value is, where your place is at in the world. And so usually it's between the ages of 0 and 7. If you really want to understand your behaviors or patterns, why you are the way they are, they usually show up then. That doesn't mean that we can't have other really big, meaningful events in our life that happen like later in our life that make an impact as well. But typically what I find with clients is that it's happening within that time period, because between the ages of 0 and 7 is a really interesting part of development where you don't quite yet have the ability to decipher what's real and what's false. Everything is just intake. That's why I can go up to my 4.5-year-old and say, Santa Claus is real and he's your uncle and he's going to start picking you up after school. He's just going to say, okay. And so you don't have an analytical mind yet. So after 7, then you have the ability to say, I don't actually think Santa's real and I don't think reindeer exist. And so again, if you want to understand your life and why your belief system and thought patterns are set up in a particular way, you'll find out in that time period.
Okay, so what about imposter syndrome? Talk to
Yeah.
me about how you've seen it show up in people and then what your best tips and tricks are to combat it.
Yeah, best tips and tricks for imposter syndrome go back to those really compelling questions that we can ask ourselves. Where in my life did I learn that I could not trust what I'm creating for myself? Where in my life did I learn that there's a separation between what's real and what's not real? Because I really believe that that's what imposter syndrome is. It's this complete disconnection between who you are and what you're creating and how you're showing up in the world. So going back to the root cause analysis of where did this start? How can I unhook and unbind myself from that story? Because it's really just a story. It's not rooted in any truth outside of a story that happened to you, likely in childhood. And so it's being able to ask yourself those questions to be able to understand, like, what is the value of me feeling like I can't trust my creation? What is the value of me feeling like I'm not who I say who I am? Because even if you don't like feeling imposter syndrome, there's a value and likely a reward to that behavior. So where does that come from? And how could it be rerouted?
Yeah. Of all the things that we've talked about today, boundaries and your nervous system and dealing with emotional overwhelm and imposter syndrome, what do you think are the most important things for us to be teaching our kids? And then how do you suggest that we teach them those things?
It's a really good question. I know with my son, what's always been important for us is to always name how he's feeling and not demonize any of it. So it's okay to be mad, but it's not okay to be mean.
Yeah.
So you can cry and you can scream and you can yell and you could even tell me things that I might not like to hear. Because going back to what I shared earlier, I was taught not to do that. I was taught to be a good girl. But I want to teach my child, and we have taught our child, how to say things that even though they might not feel good to other people, that's his truth. And so an example of that would be my friend recently visited. We were all in the car. My son had said something, and my friend responded. And he said, "Oh, no, I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to my mom." Now, I don't know about you, but if I would have said that growing up, it would have been a huge problem. But this is a child that's so empowered to say what's true for him. That was real for him. I actually wasn't talking to you. I was talking to my mom. And it wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't rude. It was his truth. Being able to teach him that it's okay to honor your truth, even though my friend was like stunned that a 4.5-year-old would say something like that. But that's okay. It's okay to not give someone a hug if they're asking for one. It's okay to say, I don't want to go over to your house, or I'm ready to go home now. And being able to honor that and still work with him if it's not time to go, but still know that he has a voice, because I think that so many of us were hijacked from having one.
Yeah. What, as adults that are reparenting our inner child, what advice would you give us specifically about what you just said? Our voice was taken away from us or conditioned out of us. So if we're doing this work to reparent our inner child, where do we start with finding that voice?
I really believe it would be starting with ourselves. We oftentimes will gaslight ourselves out of our own voice. Like, you can't feel that way. You can't say you're tired right now. You can't tell, this organization that you can't speak there. It's like, no, actually I can. Actually, I understand that you have a budget, but that's not enough to hire me. And so it's before we even start to express that into the outer world, give ourselves space to have a voice within, because we can sometimes be the first stop. Even when our external world might be set up to accept our voice, we don't.
This has been an amazing conversation. I've learned so much for myself and things that I am going to go back and work on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your wealth of wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to applying what you've taught us today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Empowered Living. I hope today's conversation sparked some inspiration and gave you tools to live more intentionally in your family, work, and life. If you enjoyed our episode today, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story or actionable takeaway. And if you know someone who would love this episode, share it with them, because living an intentional life is better when we do it together. Until next time, remember, the life you want doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. Let's keep creating it one step at a time.